This is a difficult speech for me to give as my presidential address because we're gathering here at a time when we all know that we're on the cusp of massive change in the UK university system. We don't know exactly what's coming, but now more than for several generations, the past may not be a good predictor of the future. All of this makes it difficult to get the tone of this speech exactly right. But let me start, of course, by welcoming the Minister here today. David, obviously, we're talking to you primarily as Minister for Higher Education, University Science in England, but clearly many of the issues directly affect the devolved administrations represented in the audience here. I'd like to make 3 comments directly to you, David. First, please understand that all members of UUK realise the financial context. We do not deny the severity of the difficulties facing the government in dealing with the public finances. We know reductions in public financing are on the way. Second, can I state unequivocally that we appreciate how much time you have spent making sure that you know about the entire sector. We applaud that, and I know that you personally see universities and students as absolutely central to the future of our country. Equally, I know that you do not take a purely instrumental view of university education, well understand the wider virtues of a university education, and are personally committed to increasing, deepening and widening participation. I also note with pleasure the government's clear commitment to social mobility and to the Deputy Prime Minister's statements about the role of higher education in furthering that shared aim. Third, I am particularly aware that any minister appearing before any audience today will hear calls for protecting certain areas of public spending. Therefore, the obvious reaction to anything that the president of a body like UUK might say is, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But my argument is not about what is best for the UK's universities. It's about what is best for the future of the UK. Before turning to the focus of today's address, I want to say a few words about 2 other issues. First, Damien Green's speech on Monday night. UUK is pleased to hear his unequivocal commitment that the great international success story that is the UK university system must not be damaged by any changes to international student visa regulations. But the details really do matter here. Thus, while understanding the problems with individuals entering the UK to study at bogus colleges, we must stress that many UK universities rely significantly on feeder programmes taught in affiliated colleges for their recruitment. The university sector must be protected in any change to the visa system. Yet, if our experience with the new working visa arrangements is anything to go by, there may well be significant differences between what is said and what is implemented. Specifically, if reducing the number of international students is a policy objective, can I ask, through you, which sector of the UK economy is going to expand to replace the lost income to UK PLC? Universities really could face a triple whammy of spending review, SR reductions, a funding valley of death, and restrictions on international recruitment. Secondly, can I simply state so that there is absolutely no doubt at all that higher education is transformative, both for individuals as well as for economies. I'm going to say much more about the economic dimension shortly. But for individuals like me, going to universities literally changed not only my life chances, but the person I became. That goes regardless of which institution is attended and whatever the mode of study. These are lives and life chances we're dealing with here. But I want to focus today on two sets of issues. Firstly, the future of the UK economy, and secondly, the potential pitfalls of the decisions that are shortly to be made by the government over the spending review and Lord Brown's report. Let me start with the future of the UK economy. Unlike the second part of my address, my focus here is not on universities in themselves. My logic is to ask, what choices do we have over the kind of economy the UK will be in the future, and then ask what this implies for the research base of the UK, in which UK universities obviously have a major role. Most of the issues to do with the economy involve research, but clearly higher level skills are part of the story. And of course, similar arguments can be made about the role of universities in social mobility, social justice, and social inclusion. But in the case of the research base, I think there is literally no substitute for the role that universities have to play if we are to have a successful economy in the future. This, then, is a narrative that does not start with the universities and what might be good for them, but instead starts with the economy and specifically with the best strategy to ensure future economic growth. Put bluntly, my worry is that we may be about to make decisions that fundamentally undermine our future capacity to be a globally competitive knowledge economy. I don't have children, but if I did, then I would be worried about what kinds of jobs they might have in the future if we make short-term spending decisions on the research base that reduce the UK to being a second-rate knowledge economy. The decisions the government is going to make in the spending review about the research and skills base are unlike those it will make in other sectors. They will fundamentally determine the levels of growth this country might enjoy, the type of economy we become, and thus the jobs our children might have. Other sectors can make that case, but I honestly believe that no sector can argue that it plays as determining a role in the nature of the future economy as does the research base. Recent analysis in June 2010 by Nesta about the future of the UK economy makes the point with crystal clarity. They note that innovation accounted for 2/3 of productivity growth between 2001 and 2007. Looking at 4 scenarios for future economic growth in the UK: business as usual, manufacturing renaissance, high-tech flourishing, innovation across the country. They conclude that the best chance for the future economic growth comes from the last 2 scenarios, and in each case they highlight, quote, the important role that the knowledge economy has in driving that growth over the next decade, end quote. Now, of course, we've all been here before. The previous government commissioned reports that looked at the skills needed for such an economy, the Leach report, and the government's science and innovation policies, the Sainsbury report. These painted a detailed, evidence-based and compelling account of what kind of skills and research base the UK needed to compete in the future. The central conclusion of Leach, that the proportion of jobs requiring skills of level 4 or above will increase from 29% to 40% by 2020, that conclusion has recently been reinforced by both the CBI and the UK CES skills audit. Both argue for a substantial increase in the participation rate in HE in order for the UK to remain competitive as a knowledge economy. In particular, I would recommend anyone to reread Lord Sainsbury's report, Race to the Top, which is, in my view, the most intellectually convincing report on the topic I've ever read. It is a report that is referred to by research leaders and government leaders in our competitive knowledge economies. It is the alpha and omega of analysis on how science and research policy relate to economic growth, presenting a joined-up analysis, a clear vision, and providing a long-term strategy for maximising innovation and economic growth. Its core claim is that the UK cannot win a race to the bottom on low wage rates for low value-added jobs, and thus has to win the race to the top by creating high value-added jobs. To do this requires investing in the innovation ecosystem. It concludes, quote, "We can be one of the winners in the race to the top, but only if we run fast." Given that conclusion, the UKTI's July 2010 report on inward investment, with a preface by William Hague and Vince Cable, makes interesting reading, arguing that currently the UK has the strongest research base in Europe. It continues, quote, "For international companies, the benefits of locating in the UK to access the world-class R&D base remain clear. For example, overseas entities own 37% of the patents in the UK, compared to just 11.2% in the USA and just 4.4% in Japan," end quote. But it warns, quote, "The international competitive environment to win high-value R&D investment is intense," end quote. With 80% of the £400 billion annually invested by the 1,000 largest companies in the world, that 80% of that spend is concentrated in just 5 countries: the UK, Germany, France, Japan, and the USA. So, let's now look logically at how are these competitors investing in their R&D base. Here, the UK currently compares poorly. Using the latest OECD figures, the percentages of GDP spend on R&D are Sweden 3.73, Finland 3.45, Japan 3.39, Korea 3.23, Switzerland 2.9, USA 2.62, Germany 2.53, France 2.1, Canada 1.94, UK 1.78. But what of future investment, you might ask? As President Sarkozy put it on the 26th of July this year, quote, "In the current economic downturn, many countries have chosen to curtail their research budgets. As you know, we chose not to cut ours. Instead, we increased it. With Western economies going through a difficult time, governments are obviously tempted to postpone needed investments in science. We, in France, took the opposite task, considering that higher education and research are the solution to the recession. The economic downturn should not prompt us to postpone investment in science, but rather to bring it forward. New knowledge will be the best weapon in fighting the recession," end quote. The most recent data presents a depressing picture in terms of the comparison between UK investment decisions over science and research and those of our major competitors. Here are some headlines. In the United States, doubling science spend to 2016, 6% more to be spent in 2011, $21 billion increase in science and research over the next 2 years. Canada, $6 billion increase in R&D. Germany, additional 18 billion euros for science and R&D from 2010 to 2015. France, additional 8 billion euro for research, plus an additional 11 billion euro for higher education. China, additional 860 million research support fund. Australia, additional 580 million into research in universities on top of an increase of 25% in science and innovation spend between 2008-9 and 2009-10. There are, of course, countries reducing their research funding, notably Spain, the Czech Republic, and Ecuador. In the decisions to be made in the spending review, there is one fundamental difference between those decisions on the funding of university teaching and student support and those on the research base. There is no obvious substitute for lost government funding of the research base. All, I repeat, all the international and UK evidence points to one inescapable conclusion. research and development, it is governmental spending that leverages out private sector spending, is a magnet for private investment and for inward investment. Reducing government R&D spending thus starts a vicious circle, leading not to replacement private R&D spend, but to reductions in private spend. This leads to a downward spiral as charities and businesses react by moving their investments to our competitors. Business leaders have made the position absolutely clear. In letters to the Times and to the Daily Telegraph in June 2010, a group of CEOs wrote that, quote, "We need a credible plan for restoring fiscal balance, but urge the government to be cautious over those elements of public spending that are vital for future growth and prosperity in the economy: science, innovation, and knowledge." These sentiments have been echoed by Richard Lambert of the CBI in the last week. It's also critically important that in forthcoming decisions on the research base, we do not cause irreparable damage, taking us out of being a serious scientific nation. The policies that will do that also stop us from being able to exploit the 90% of world research that's undertaken in our competitors, a challenge, Minister, you issued to us earlier in the summer. In this sense, whatever is done on the research base is unlike other choices facing the government, where decisions made this year can be reversed when the public finances improve. Whereas reducing, say, the number of plumbers trained in Grimsby for a year can be reversed the next year, this is literally not the same in big-ticket science and research commitments. We are either in CERN or not, and there is not the easy option of reducing our subscriptions by a few percent. Similarly, pulling out of research council institutes or large-scale facilities could also dismantle the scientific infrastructure surrounding them. In this centrally important sense, it is the quality of the UK research base at the very top end of international competition that defines the quality of the UK R&D brand. Our competitor knowledge economies are without exception investing heavily in the research and science base. And I know personally they simply cannot understand our logic of reducing investment in what they see as the number one route towards future economic growth. Indeed, as one very senior individual in Singapore put it to me just a month ago, at a time of economic problems, the very last thing you do is to reduce research and science investment. In fact, you do precisely the opposite. Otherwise, you get into a growth-death spiral. In that light, I was heartened to hear George Osborne's recent insistence that cuts must not damage economic growth. I agree with that. Indeed, to use an analogy, cutting back on the UK's R&D base now would be the equivalent of the government cutting back on the production of Spitfires in the early summer of 1940. On the government's major decisions, on the Brown Report and on the spending review, I want to speak specifically about the major potential pitfalls that worry us here at UUK. Before I do so, let me repeat for the record UUK's view that whatever the outcome of Lord Brown's report, access to higher education has to be free at the point of delivery, access to students from low socioeconomic backgrounds has to be enhanced by a system of institutional bursaries and government grants. There has to be a system of student financing that deals with the distinct problems of part-time students, and the outcome has to preserve the essential link between the student and the institution they attend. However, assuming these concerns are dealt with, the following 8 pitfalls remain. The first, this is an argument I've trailed extensively over the last few months. My biggest single worry is that the spending review will be carried out confident in the knowledge that Lord Brown will introduce replacement funding. There are 2 points here. On the one hand, This could lead to greater reductions being made in university funding than might otherwise be the case. Brown's figure of steady-state net increased graduate contributions could be used to increase the reductions that universities might face. But what if the process of getting parliamentary assent for the proposals altered the amount of funding to come to universities? The SR would have been a done deal. On the other hand, and more significantly, I think, there is the possibility of Lord Brown's recommendation being a technical solution that is unacceptable to Parliament. I do not need to remind this audience of the parliamentary arithmetic. Former Prime Minister Blair only got his HE bill through by 5 votes when he had a 168-seat majority. And he did not have 55 of the 57 Lib Dem MPs having signed the NUS pledge to vote against any fee increase. This could potentially lead to 2 problems, I think. Either that the Brown proposals get delayed, and thus the valley of death gets wider, or that alternative or partial recommendations, such as the widely discussed notions of a graduate tax, get put to Parliament, thus deepening the valley. The second potential pitfall concerns timing, namely, getting the Brown and spending review changes into synchronisation. Thus, it is not just how much the spending review reduces the public funding of HE, but also how Treasury sculpts these changes and how they relate to any increase in graduate contributions emerging out of Brown. The damage is done if cuts are imposed before the compensating income is delivered. The key point is that the Treasury deadline for reductions in public spending is 2014-15. This requires that all replacement funding has to be delivered by then. This shows the fragility of the relationship between the spending review and Brown. There are also significant Barnett consequentials of the spending review and Brown outcomes, which could have significant effects on Scotland and Wales. Though the block grant is unhypothecated, some combinations of spending review reductions, and increasing private contributions could lead to a double whammy for the devolved administrations. Third, focusing on teaching funding, there is the danger of ignoring the fact that even if Brown replaces lost HEFCE funding that worked for the university sector as a whole, there could be significant differences at institutional level. Some institutions could be destabilised if they were subjected to a reduction in public funds, and yet were unable to make that up with replacement funding in the post-Brown fees environment. And this could well be institutions playing an essential local and regional role in educating students, in widening participation, and in supporting regional businesses and the regional economy. Fourth, since it looks likely that we're facing considerable change, it's imperative that the details of change are thought through carefully. Thus, however tempting it might be to expand the role of either HE and FE or private providers, please, Minister, listen to UUK's concerns about quality, about the student experience, and about the international ramifications of these changes. Equally, please do not underestimate the potentially destabilising effects of introducing too suddenly fundamental challenges to how institutions price their courses. In all of this, the role of HEFCE becomes literally pivotal. Fifth, turning to research funding. Can I stress the importance of keeping the balance between the two sides of dual support? Currently, the research and science budget stands at about 6 billion for the UK, split into 2 billion of QR and 4 billion in the science budget, the latter comprising roughly 2 billion of spend on large-scale international subscriptions, large-scale facilities, and research institutes, with roughly 2 billion going to universities to fund postgraduates and responsive mode research grants. In response to Adrian Smith's request for comments on the balance of these sums, the consensus was that the balance was about right. Altering that balance, say by reducing QR more than Research Council and science spend, will unsettle this balance and adversely affect the humanities and the social sciences, because of their much greater reliance on QR than on Research Council income. Therefore, any headline reduction in the research base has to be interpreted in the light of the inherent problems in reducing international subscriptions and large-scale facilities. Thus, any headline reduction is likely to fall disproportionately on institutions. Sixth, while it's tempting to think that significant savings in QR can be made from removing funding from those units that are either small or are found in institutions with little research, the reality is that significant cuts in QR will have to affect all institutions. About 85% of both QR and Research Council funding to institutions goes to 40 institutions. So there's no easy way of reducing research funding much above 10% in real terms over 4 years without cutting into the research work of the research intensives. Nor, of course, can we accept the argument that research funding should simply be removed from a group of institutions with research strength in specific subjects. And if I may refer to yesterday's speech by Vince Cable, can I limit myself to 2 comments? First, the Secretary of State said that we should concentrate research resource on 3-star and 4-star work, of which he said there was 54%. Well, how much money goes to that 54% of 3-star and 4-star work? 90% of QR goes to 3-star and 4-star work. I think this represents concentration. Secondly, it really does not help when the Secretary of State talks about mediocrity in UK research. It is a matter of regret to me that the Secretary of State made these comments, because if you look about the comment about mediocrity on UK research, if you take the RAE, international excellent research comprised 87% of the research submitted. So I think it's regrettable that he made 2 fundamental errors in what he said. And secondly, I just would say that this is potentially very damaging for the reputation of UK research. Penultimately, given all the above, can I stress how important it is that HEFCE has the ability to smooth these significant transitions? If its funding faces major reductions, there will come a point where it will not have the resources to do the things the government wants it to do. UUK stands firmly behind HEFCE as an absolutely necessary body to oil the wheels and smooth transitions as institutions face major changes. In doing so, HEFCE's primary interest must be to protect students, but it has to have the resources to do so. This is exacerbated if government also wants HEFCE to be the purchaser of science and medicine, promote widening participation and student retention, push carbon reduction plans, oversee business engagement, fund sector-wide agencies, etc. And although a matter for the devolved administrations, the same logic surely applies to the roles of the Scottish Funding Council and HEFCE. Finally, in addition to the effects of forthcoming decisions on students, staff and institutions in the UK, we must be aware of the international repercussions. It would be playing into the hands of our competitors if the headlines following the spending review were UK disinvests in HE. That damages every institution in the country, as well as the very part of our economy that the Prime Minister was at pains to promote in New York and Delhi recently as what the UK brought to the table in the 21st century. I do not want the announcements on the 20th of October to be accompanied by the sounds of hands rubbing with glee in the UK's HE competitors. None of what I've said should be taken for a second as implying that there is no scope for reform within the system as it exists. We have a responsibility to shape our own future. There's been important work on efficiencies undertaken already, but we have to go further. We are about to launch a new programme under the leadership of Professor Ian Diamond, to look at options for efficiencies throughout the university sector. The allocation of funding through the University Modernisation Fund shows that the sector is willing to engage with the issue. 57 institutions secured funding to develop so-called invest-to-save measures. The UK will do all it can to lead this agenda and identify where there are savings to be made. Similarly, we will work to examine and promote alternative ways of increasing participation, including different relationships between FE and HE and increasing links with private providers. We accept that we must be flexible and must not become obstacles to change. So in conclusion, Minister, UUK looks to the government to get its spending decisions right and to work in a joined-up way to unlock our potential to remain one of the leading knowledge economies in the world. My fundamental question is, if we do not try to win the race to the top, what future lies in store for the UK? But the logic of the race to the top and of Leach may not be the view of this government, though the report by Sir James Dyson and the recent CBI statements on the topic indicate clear support for this logic. Therefore, can I end really with a simple intellectual challenge to you, Minister? David, is it not time for your government to revisit race to the top and Leach? Tell us if you accept the logic. If you do not, can you tell us how we will achieve future economic prosperity and what exactly is the link between the economy and the research and higher level skills base? It is time that race to the top was either restated or replaced. We surely need that long-term vision, that strategy, that commitment to enhancing the science and innovation base and promoting future economic growth. So, standing as we do, on the cusp of significant change, it's absolutely imperative for the future of this country that the UK remains a first-rank knowledge economy, not for the sake of the universities, not even for the sake of current and future staff and students. No, the UK has to remain a leading knowledge economy because there literally is no other choice if we want to bequeath economic prosperity to our children. This week's OECD data shows that we are falling comparatively, both in terms of the amount spent on HE compared to the OECD average, 1.3% compared to 1.5%, with the US increasing its spend from 2.9 to 3.1, and also falling behind in terms of the percentage of young people graduating. As he put it in what I have to say seemed to me very prophetic words, Andreas Schleicher said in his briefing this week about the UK, quote, "The current flattening out in higher education participation means that in the long term, economic growth potential is more limited." Next week, we'll see the publication of the New Times Higher World Rankings, which are expected to show a decline in the UK's comparative performance, with our competitors quickly catching up. I think the future is looking us in the face, and we could be about to seal our fate as a first-rank knowledge economy. Minister, if this logic is wrong, if it's self-serving, if it's outdated, let's have the debate. But if it's correct, please do not make decisions that prevent us from taking part in the race to the top, let alone win it. And if we cannot take part in that race, what exactly is the future for the UK economy and thus for our society? Please, Minister, do not do long-term and irreversible damage for the sake of short-term financial considerations. Our successors will never forgive us if we let this happen, and nor should they. Thank you.